Hello, everyone. Just want to give you some extra patron exclusive content. Um, Starting off with updates from me. Obviously, Cyberpunk Part 3 is released. It was a huge success. It's gotten about 250,000 views in 2 weeks, which is great. Hopefully, it continues that momentum throughout the end of the year. I managed to finish it up and get it released earlier in the year. Part 2 was kind of a frantic run to the end. I managed to get out halfway through December, but this one is early mid November. After a bunch of delays and issues, last minute, you know, render errors, last minute issues with Warner Brothers claiming content and whatnot. So I had to make some edits there, and it's just a massive video. Not only is it by far the longest video I've done by almost half an hour or more, but it's also 4K. So the file, I think the export was about 30 to 40 gigabytes was the MP4 file. So just even rendering that sucker took several hours, even if with everything already pre-rendered. It took about 4 hours, and uploading it took about 2 to 3 hours, and then having it processed took another hour or so. So basically, any edit or revision was another 8 hours of just solid, just crunching on my machine, which is a Ryzen 9. So as you can imagine, it was a pretty hefty process, but I went through a couple of revisions, got it up. Still a couple tiny little minor editing errors that still bug me, but otherwise it's in pretty good shape. But yeah, it's been doing great. As it continues to grow, I think we just passed 2 million views on Cyberpunk Part 1 and 500,000 views on Cyberpunk Part 2. So if this part continues to grow and the other parts have obviously gotten a second or third wind as well, we may see a collective total of 3 million views across the series, which is pretty exciting. I'm really excited about that. So it's amazing that my little nerdy rants about the genre I love has reached so many people. So I'm really excited about that. So yeah, right now we're sitting at 4.5 hours of tightly scripted cyberpunk documentary. So if you've been sleeping on it, go ahead and watch it. It now covers pretty much extensively from the origins of cyberpunk through the 90s, which doesn't sound like much, but there's a ton to cover. And I still didn't get into some things as much as I probably should have, but in the end, I think I covered the most important topics and some topics in pretty good detail. Especially things like Blade Runner game, Ghost in the Shell, Matrix. In this last episode, I cover a lot of VR and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, if you see my recent vlogs, you kind of get what I was going for there. But yeah, I'm pretty proud of this one. It was a massive amount of work. I probably spent more Patreon and AdSense revenue into making this than any other video. Probably all my other videos combined. Actually, I put a lot of money into this one. Just stock images, stock videos, video templates, voice actors, I think 2 or 3 different media sites, music, licensing tons of music for this to get the right sound, especially during my music segment. I was specifically finding tracks that I could license and get legal right to use it in the video that sounded very similar to things like Prodigy, Daft Punk, 9 Inch Nails and stuff like that. And I think I did a pretty good job. Obviously, it'd be ideal to be able to use the official tracks for everything, but that just wasn't in the cards. I'd rather play it safe and make sure that everybody can see my video across the world, because that's happened before. I think I've gotten a claim. My interview with Ted Peterson actually got claimed by the BBC for a small clip I used, and that was blocked the entire country of the UK. So I don't want to make that mistake again, and I want to make sure that everything's nice and everything's kosher. So that's Cyberpunk. So that's going to go on the ice for a bit. I'm taking a hiatus from Cyberpunk, as I've mentioned in previous posts and tweets and things like that. Really, really happy with what I did, but I literally started on this series probably early to mid 2019, I think. And yeah, no, it's been almost 3 years straight of Cyberpunk scripting, editing, voicing, etc. So I want to kind of take a break from that and cover some more games and kind of vary up my content a bit, because I've always kind of been split across various things. Like, I kind of I started in shooters, actually. I started in shooters, multiplayer games, and I evolved into, Doom, first person shooters. Then I got into Looking Glass RPGs, things like that. Then I kind of tilted over to Cyberpunk and did all sorts of things. So I think I pretty much have four main categories of content. I have the sort of fantasy RPG stuff, Daggerfall, Elder Scrolls, whatnot. I have the sort of post-apocalyptic stuff, post-apocalyptic first-person shooters, RPGs, etc. Then I have the sort of cyberpunk related stuff with my big cyberpunk documentary and other cyberpunk reviews, like my cyberpunk curated series that I've not worked on for a bit. And then I think my fourth main category is probably Japanese RPGs. So Final Fantasy, Chrono Trigger, Alundra, things like that. So those have been my four main pillars of content, I think. So I think it's high time to kind of pivot to the other ones for a bit. Have some ideas for future Elder Scrolls content. I feel like I was pretty comprehensive with my documentary a few years ago, but I know that a lot of people subscribe to me to see me talk about Elder Scrolls and fantasy content. So I do want to return to that, but I don't want to just do Elder Scrolls content because people want to see it. I want to do it because I actually have something to say. But I think I do have a couple things that I want to talk about, particularly maybe it's just a seed of an idea right now, but eventually I want to basically do a video called Finding Daggerfall 2.0, which is basically me doing a very brief documentary on the history of Daggerfall and what happened and everything like that. Also getting into how Gavin and his co-workers and collaborators basically were able to revive Daggerfall completely in the Daggerfall Unity project, and how the multitude of modders and community, really active community members, have completely reborn the excitement for the game, and how using mods can basically make a complete remake of the game, from the ground up, from the visuals, from mechanics and things like that. So that's an idea in the back burner right now. I'm kind of thinking how that would look. It's also a little bit frustrating because I don't like covering games that aren't finished. So I don't necessarily want to dig into Daggerfall Unity until it's 1.0, but it's basically 1.0 at this point, if not in name and spirit. But maybe I can reach out to Gavin to see what his kind of timeline is on that. I know it's he's got a full-time job on top of everything, just like I do. So I know it's rough, but that would be something I'd like to do. Basically, like, discovering what a Daggerfall 2.0 could look like, basically. But in the immediate future, I'd like to do some more of my Apocalypse archived videos. That would be pretty fun. I really am overdue with reviewing Adam RPG, as well as there's Encased, there's Metro series, there's Underrail. There's lots of other really good games that I could cover in that series. So, oh yeah, and also what was that? Death Trash game. That was really a kind of nice surprise. Plenty to do there, but I think I'm really, really inspired currently to work on a as comprehensive as possible retrospective for Quintet. There's a lot of information out there, but unfortunately, the main developers of Quintet's games are kind of AWOL. If you're not familiar, Quintet is basically a poor man's Square, or a poor man's I forget the name of the team that did Dragon Quest. They kind of played third fiddle to those games. Three of the people who worked on Quintet's games came out of Nihon Falcom, the creators of the Ys games, if you're familiar with those. Those have always been pretty obscure in the States, but they're kind of getting a bit more getting a bit more popularity over in the States recently. I've been noticing a lot of Ys games get a lot of traction on Steam and new consoles and stuff, so they're doing well. But yeah, Nihon Falcom alumni basically went on to create Quintet, and they created ActRaiser, which recently got a remake, which is actually awesome. I played it, pretty good. And they did ActRaiser 2, obviously. Very difficult game, one of the hardest games I've played. And they did Soul Blazer, Illusion of Gaia, also known as Illusion of Time, and Terranigma, which is basically one of the best games you've never played because it was during like the final era of the SNES. But essentially what had happened is that Enix USA had kind of consolidated their efforts because Nintendo was still going with cartridge, but every RPG designer wanted to go with disc. And it's kind of the Japanese way to not just abandon your partners. So, sorry, not Nihon. Enix USA basically shut down at the behest of Enix Japan, to basically kind of relook at things and see how they're going to move forward. And that happened, unfortunately, right before the game would have been localized and published in the States. So Terranigma got a European PAL release, but not a US release. So people really only got it if they were, crazy hyper enthusiasts who had a PAL and SNES and a PAL cartridge, or most likely downloaded the ROM and emulated it. So that's how I played it, and I really enjoyed when I played it. I've played through Illusion of Gaia and Terranigma. I'm going to play through them again. I'm also playing through Soul Blazer for the first time. It's an uneven game. It's got some issues, but I can really see the kind of sparks of inspiration that led to Illusion of Gaia, which I really like, and then Terranigma, which I also love. So it's a really, really interesting story, and a not too often covered developer. Like, there's a billion and one retrospectives of the Final Fantasy games, and Dragon Quest and all these other, and I love those as well, obviously, but I really feel like their story needs to be told. And I found a gold mine of interviews from old magazines and things from like the early 90s, mid 90s, and stuff like that, as well as the US producer, actually had some really interesting insight on how some of these games came to happen. For example, Robert Gerald, he was an Enix USA producer. He's now working at Microsoft. He worked on the Kinect. He's now most recently worked on a Microsoft Flight Simulator. Robert was actually owned up on a lot of his mistakes and his kind of mishandled direction that he kind of pushed for the Enix games. Like he says he's partially responsible for why ActRaiser 2 cut out the God game, part of the game, which I sorely missed, and a lot of people did. And I also have some insight on why that game ended up becoming so goddamn difficult. So that'll be interesting. And I have a lot of these quotes, and I've already started arranging voice actors to voice them. I really enjoy the separation between quotes being voiced by somebody else and the narration voiced by me. I think that's really important, because that way it kind of gives more character to the quotes. And in the case of Cyberpunk Part 3, I actually found a really good voice actor who worked with me for a few days to kind of nail the weird Virginian slash North Carolinian slash Canadian accent that William Gibson has. I think he did a pretty good job. It doesn't sound exactly like him, but a lot of commenters were saying, wow, he nailed it. He sounded just like William Gibson. Those quotes, unfortunately, didn't have voice. There was one, actually, I think one of the quotes was actually voiced, but whoever did the audio that day, it was at some sort of college, but whoever did the audio that day for William Gibson just didn't know what they're doing. So it was very muddy, very echoey, bad acoustics. So I wanted a fresh, new voiceover for that. And a lot of the really meaty quotes from William Gibson, for example, were from his blog from 2003, also from articles where he was like a written interview. So, but I think it's really important to have those as voiced, and if I could have it as close to his voice as possible, because I'd already kind of quoted him, directly through clips from an early BBC interview that he did in the early 90s, as well as the weird 1990 Cyberpunk documentary. I pulled a quote or two from that in my first part. But going back to the Quintet retrospective, I've already kind of picked out some quotes from Japanese devs, anything from like testers to artists to musicians to programmers to designers to producers, like lots of people who are involved in the project. And I have really good sources for all those. And I'm gonna credit all those sources because those have been invaluable. I didn't think that there was that much information about the development of these games until I read those interviews, and it really, really paints a picture of how amazingly creative and inspired these people were when they were making these games. And I'll try to kind of build up their character and their inspirations a bit in the documentary, and kind of give them a voice, because I don't think many people know these people. Like I had to learn who Tomoyoshi Miyazaki was, through who Masaya Hashimoto were. Those are the co-founders of Quintet. Most people know, I think, at least the people that are kind of in on the Japanese video game scene kind of know who Yuzo Koshiro is. He's definitely made a great brand for himself. He's probably most famous for doing the Streets of Rage music, but he's got a pretty big following online and everything like that. It's just kind of sad. A couple of the people have got a pretty good following online, like Kamui Fujiwara was the character artist, and he's been a huge proponent of getting the Quintet games to be revived, and especially Terranigma, who he was very directly involved with. But unfortunately, like I'm pretty sure that the main creators behind the Quintet games could come out and basically get involved with the community again if they wanted to. But I have a feeling one of two things is true. One, they don't know that there's such a following for their games. I thought maybe they thought that the games were failures. It could be. Or two, they just don't want to be in the spotlight, which I can respect. So it's going to be a little bit of a downer for the ending because we don't really have a resolution for these. But I will end on a kind of positive note in that ActRaiser got a really good remake for the most part, and that people are still clamoring for some sort of re-release of Illusion of Gaia, Soul Blazer, and Terranigma. So that's pretty positive. So I'm trying to balance it with being a bit bummed out, but also being positive for the future. I also have to very carefully word this because I try not to make my videos too dated. If I do have to say something that may change, like I'm really, really glad I did this for my Elder Scrolls game, Elder Scrolls documentary, because unfortunately, tragically, the CEO of ZeniMax died recently. But I said at the time of this video's release, blah, and it was about him and it was about Christopher Weaver. So it's now different, but it still kind of saves itself a bit because I specifically said at the time of this video's release. But I try not to do that too much. I try to make it so that even if something drastically changes in the future, that the video isn't dated and old and bad. So, yeah, it's a challenge, but I'm pretty excited to delve into this. I already have quite a bit written. I have a few thousand words written in a first draft. I'm kind of laying out the sections. There's a lot of games to play. I'm trying to play all of these games throughout most of the runtime, if not the whole runtime. If I played it before, I might do like part of the game, but I should have a complete playthrough of all the major games. The major games I'm going to be covering are ActRaiser, ActRaiser 2, Soul Blazer, Illusion of Gaia, Terranigma, Grand Stream Saga, which I didn't know it was them, but that's the same guys. I played that on PlayStation back in the day. I remember that game. Funnily enough, that was also slightly tied to my Cyberpunk documentary in that they hired Production IG, the same studio behind Ghost in the Shell, to do their cutscenes for the Grand Stream Saga, which is kind of cool. And they've also made a couple other games afterward, like Brightest, Planet Leica, and a few other things. I'll touch on those briefly. They aren't so important to the story, but they are a couple of the last projects that are credited to the founders of Quintet, so they're important to bring up. But really, I feel that the golden age era of Quintet kind of ended with Terranigma. That's going to be the main focus is that game, pretty much. Definitely its predecessors, but Terranigma was kind of their magnum opus, in my opinion. Grand Stream was okay from what I recall, but it was one of those early kind of awkward JRPGs. It was made the same year Final Fantasy VII came out, but it ended up being released in the States a year later, and yeah, it was a little awkward. It wasn't the greatest, but it was a very new thing. It was difficult to jump to 3D. A lot of games struggled at the time. Every major game that jumped to 3D had a hard time usually. But I have a lot of quotes, a lot of things to back up my claims, and I have some really cool visuals. And I've already gotten a lot of remixes and music together for the soundtrack. It's going to be a really nice listen, just like my other videos. I've got some of the people at OC Remix did amazing remixes of Terranigma. I'm really looking forward to using those. But yeah, otherwise, really exciting stuff. I'll speak more about it as I get further along in the script and the research phase. But yeah, I'm really enjoying the games so far. Played more of ActRaiser, played some of the ActRaiser remake. played some ActRaiser 2. I'm getting toward the end of Soul Blazer, and then I'll jump onto Illusion of Gaia, Robotrek, Terranigma. I keep on forgetting about Robotrek. That's another game they made. But yeah, that's kind of like a more traditional Final Fantasy-esque game, turn-based, but with like robots and things like that. So that should be kind of fun. More of a sci-fi Final Fantasy sort of game there. But otherwise, yeah, that's exciting. More JRPG content, but it's still applicable to everybody. I mean, you may not be a JRPG fan, but I think a lot of us were more united back in the day because JRPGs, I don't know how to say this, but I think JRPGs back in the SNES days were less anime, if that makes sense. I think a lot of JRPGs now have a very distinct style, which is a bit more divisive to some people. Whereas I don't think anybody hates Chrono Trigger. Like, really, how could you hate Chrono Trigger, right? Like, I'm sure there's somebody who hates Chrono Trigger, but like, I could see people who weren't crazy about Xenoblade or I should say Xenos, Chronicles, or people who aren't really that into Persona, even though Persona is a very gorgeous game. Like, it definitely has a style to it that you may or may not like. So, but back in the day, I think that JRPGs weren't quite so anime and so therefore aren't quite as divisive or weeby. I don't know. It's weird, but I'm pretty sure people will get a lot out of this video, whether they're huge fans of the SNES JRPGs or not. But anyway, hopefully you found this exciting or interesting. I'll try to do more regular updates. I don't want to say this, but usually I just realized at the end of the month that an entire month has gone by, and I'm like, oh man, I better get something together for the patrons. And there's been a lot of new patrons this month, thanks to Cyberpunk Part 3 releasing. So welcome everyone. And yeah, hopefully to do more updates. I'll try to do some more interesting kind of tidbits as I think of them. I'm just kind of bad at this. So I need to kind of work on that. But I'll at least try to do at least one update a month. I know that's kind of my bare minimum, but I'll try to do that. Maybe share clips and interesting tidbits. I'll also have a lot of artwork and photos. I have some photos of all the people involved, but they're all very, very, very low res. So I'm going to come up with some creative ways of upscaling that. I've been kind of getting really into AI upscaling recently. That's why a lot of these pictures from the 90s and earlier from the Cyberpunk video have been really sharp despite their age. You may not have seen the originals, but trust me, a lot of those photos were extremely small to begin with. So yeah, exciting. Always trying to improve, always trying to make things better, more clear, work on my pacing, work on my editing style, work on my writing, double, triple, quadruple check my facts. And yeah, exciting times ahead. I hope you all have a great holiday season, and I'll see you next time. Hopefully not too long, probably in December. I'll have a better idea of how long the Quintet retrospective is going to be, what it's going to cover, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, very exciting stuff. Anyway, thanks so much for listening. I'll see you next time.